So really, any trip we undertake, we break everything down into 5 simple steps. Morning. So we've got about 2 weeks, nearly 3 weeks before we go travelling again, and the car is almost done. I've got one more job on the Land Rover and then it will be ready to go. And hopefully I'll get a video out of everything we've done to the Land Rover since the last update. But today I wanted to do a video on planning and thinking about everything that's needed to be considered when thinking about going abroad and on one of our 4x4 trips. So in order to make this video make some sort of sense and to put it in a logical system that everyone else would be able to understand rather than my random way of going and doing things, I basically broke things down to 5 simple steps. But before I can do those 5 steps, I have to know where I'm going. And we decided about a year ago that we wanted to go to Greece. And so that the whole planning is orientated around the trip to Greece from West Wales. So once we've decided where we're going to go on a trip, I then basically have 5 steps that I go through to organise everything and make sure that everything's covered. The 5 steps are how we're going to get there. That includes the roads and the ferries or train, whichever's applicable. Second thing is the vehicle. And as you all know, if you've watched any of our previous videos, if you haven't, please do go and watch them. We've recently changed from a modern vehicle to an older vehicle. So all of those things are in consideration. Then the next thing was, the third thing is driving in Europe and everything that entails. And then we have our 3 threes, which I'll go into later on in the video. We work to the rule of 3 threes. And then the 5th thing is any other considerations that might be relative or relevant to the trip that we're undertaking. The first step in our planning is to figure out how we're going to get there. Our final destination is Greece, but how are we going to actually get all the way from West Wales across Europe and down to Greece? Well, the first obstacle is obviously getting across the English Channel. On this occasion, we've decided to take the Eurotunnel, really because of the speed. It's basically 35 minutes on the train and you're in France. If we'd taken the boat to Calais or Dunkirk, it would have been a lot slower. I think the boats are about an hour and a half. So on this occasion, we've decided to take the train. Once we get into Europe, we've then got to decide what route are we going to take. Now, obviously, it's a long way down to Greece. So we could go across France or Germany. There's various routes we could take. We've decided on this occasion to go down through France, cut across into Germany, just north of Switzerland, down into Austria, and then head for the Slovenian border. Now, the other thing we consider is what countries are we just going to drive straight through without stopping to see anything or do any visits of anywhere. On this occasion, we've decided that we're going to drive straight through France, across Germany, Austria and to the Slovenian border, and then when we hit Slovenia we'll slow down and start making that journey part of the trip. So the next step number 2 is the vehicle. Now obviously we've decided now to go with our new trusty steed, the Land Rover Defender 110, but we've still got things to consider. The first thing is our insurance. Obviously we need to make sure that we've got insurance, which used to be called green card scheme. You don't actually get a green card anymore, but all it involved was talking to our insurance company and telling them what countries we're going through, and they would cover us for the majority of them. Now we have got a couple of countries that we will have to stop at the border and buy insurance. They include Albania and I believe Croatia, because they are not included on our insurance card with our current insurance company. The other thing is we need to make sure that our MOT and tax are valid for the whole of the journey. If the vehicle's not taxed and MOT'd while it's in Europe, any authorities that you do come into contact with won't consider the vehicle road legal if your tax and MOT isn't in place. Now the other thing then on top of that is breakdown cover. We've decided this time to go with the AA, but there are lots of other companies out there that can do breakdown cover for the whole of Europe and beyond. One thing I'll say on breakdown cover, because we fell foul of this: if you break down in Europe and the cost of the repair is more than you wish to pay, make sure that your breakdown company will still repatriate the vehicle if you refuse to have it repaired in Europe. We have fallen foul of this with a company that basically said, you've refused to have the work done, so we're not repatriating the vehicle. Now the problem is, quite often repairs for vehicles in Europe are going to be done at a main dealer, which puts the price up, and repairs in Europe are quite often more expensive than they are in the UK. So my advice would be just to check with your breakdown cover company that they will repatriate your vehicle if you decide not to have it repaired while you're in Europe. Then the next thing we have to consider when thinking about our vehicle is the service prior to going. I always service a vehicle a couple of weeks before we go. In fact, I've done it this week. That's to make sure that everything is good after I've serviced it. Gives us a couple of weeks of shakedown, so to say, to make sure that everything is good. The next thing to consider is your spares and your tools. Now, obviously, there's no point in taking spares if you haven't got the tools, and there's no point in taking the tools if you haven't got the spares, and there's no point in taking either if you haven't got the skills to do what's required. Just take it into a garage. I've got spares with us. I've also got tools with us, so that's all sorted. We know that the one spare that we haven't got is the one thing that will go wrong, but you can only do your best. And then the last thing to consider on the vehicle front is the documents. Now, if you're not on the V5 as the registered keeper, you will need a letter of permission from the owner of the vehicle or the registered keeper on the V5 in order to travel through Europe with the vehicle. You will get asked for this if you get stopped. The other documents you need to have are obviously a copy of your insurance and your breakdown cover. We normally have a couple of copies of our V5 with us as well, and then of course don't forget your passport. And then number 3 on our list of things that we need to consider for going on a trip is driving in Europe. Now, it's slightly different for obvious reasons because you're on the opposite side of the road, but that's easy enough to get used to. Sometimes have to think about it a little bit, but that's easy. The road signs and everything else in Europe are pretty self-explanatory. They're on a par with ours in the UK. The other thing is maps and sat-nav. We have a sat-nav. We use a sat-nav sometimes. Majority of the time we are using maps. I'd recommend having a good European atlas and then maps for each country that you intend on passing through. We carry a high scale map for each country we're passing through. Then on top of that, you have to have your emergency equipment in Europe, which is a legal requirement. There are several things you have to carry, such as your bulbs for your replacement bulbs for your vehicle, warning triangles, high-vis vests, first aid kit, and in France, I believe you still have to carry the alcohol breathalyzer. We carried everything. We also carry 2 fire extinguishers, one in the front and one in the back of the vehicle. So that's another consideration to make sure you're legal within every country you go through. The other thing that needs to be considered for Europe is low emission zones. There are several of them. You can just avoid them if you want to, or you can buy the stickers for them. There's several countries have got stickers that you can purchase, but the main one for us this trip is the Crete Air, which is the French low emission zone sticker. You can buy them online, they're not expensive, can't remember exactly what they are. Buy them quite a few weeks in advance because they do post them out to you. And then number 4 on our list of things to consider is the rule of 3 threes. This is something that someone said to me many years ago, that when you're overlanding, work to the rule of 3 threes, and they are no more than 3 hours driving in one stint, don't do more than 300 miles in a day, and park up 3 hours before dark. Now, we don't stick to them rigidly. We don't do 3 hours of driving at any time. We always 2 hours, and then we'll stop for a cup of coffee or lunch. We do around about 300 miles a day when we're travelling across to our countries of destination. And then the 3 hours before dark, we'll stick with that Normally, if we're looking for a campsite, because then if we get to a campsite and they haven't got room for us, because we don't tend to book our campsites because it would put too much pressure to get to those campsites every night. So if we turn up at a campsite and they haven't got room, if we've aimed at parking up 3 hours before dark, it does mean we've still got time to move on to another campsite and find parking that way. Once we've arrived in our country of destination, or in this case Slovenia, we will do a lot less than 300 miles a day. There's no way we're going to do 300 miles in any given day on the way down to Greece. That would just be, you know, you'd be missing 90% of what you've come to see. So the 300 miles, we only work to that rule while we're travelling across Europe to our countries of destination. And number 5 on our list of things to consider when planning a trip is other miscellaneous items. I've included camping in this category. We don't book campsites prior to arrival, hence the 3 hours before dark thing. We will just pitch up and see if they've got space. Quite often though, we will wild camp and we will just park where we choose to park, which, as those of you that have seen it, I discussed this when we were moving from the demountable camper to the Land Rover. Please, if you haven't seen that video, do go and watch it. That will give you a better idea of our thinking when it comes to camping. Another thing that we always forget about that we need to consider is the change of time zones. We'll always forget to change our clocks when we get to a country. This time going to Greece, we will be going through 2 time zones. We'll end up 2 hours, I think it's ahead of the UK, isn't it, by the time we get to Athens. And then the last thing that I'll say about in this category is drones. We fly a drone, not very often, but we do fly a drone. You can't fly a drone in the EU without having the EU equivalent of our licence. They're quite easy to get. Just apply for them in the first country that you intend on flying your drone, and that should then cover you for the whole of Europe. The other thing I'll say about it is our Serbia is the same as Morocco in that you can't take a drone in. But apart from that, on this trip down to Greece, we can fly the drone in every country en route, I think. So I know it's only a short video on planning and doesn't go into a great deal of detail, but I hope it was of interest to you and even of some help if you're planning your own trip. But that gives you a brief insight into the things that we consider when travelling. It's really to demonstrate that it's not that hard to organise a trip into Europe and beyond. So once again, thanks very much for watching. Thanks for all your likes and subscriptions. Please do go and watch our other videos if you haven't done so far. Thanks very much.